Do you know what you're eating? I mean, do you really know? Because you may think you do, but you've been lied to your entire life. Now, this may be hard to stomach, but a lot of the food you eat is fake. A study found that over 75% of honey sold in the US doesn't contain any honey. According to the FDA, honey has to contain pollen, otherwise it just isn't honey. It was discovered that the vast majority of commercial honey brands on the shelves in American stores contained no pollen at all, and therefore were not actually honey. So, if all this honey isn't honey, then what is it? Well, there are many different, carefully engineered cocktails of artificial ingredients that are used to replicate real honey, and each producer uses their own unique mixture. Most are mainly made up from the infamous high fructose corn syrup, sometimes labelled as maltolol syrup, which is cut with sucrose syrup and water.
In the same way that we've misunderstood the gut and what gut health means, we misunderstood soil for the longest time. And in the early 1900s, really the late 1880s, we started to change the way we farmed. Simple things happened, like we went to steel grinding for wheat instead of stone grinding it, which meant we could get more of the fiber out of it, which means we created a higher gluten and a higher refined carbohydrate load in our flours and in our wheat system and everything else. So that's one example of a shift. But the main thing that happened is we started to disrespect the importance of crop rotation and soil rest, cover cropping, etc. This led to a massive death of the topsoil, which led to the Dust Bowl that ran through the 1920s and 30s. And we started making chemical-based fertilizers for the first time. So they found a new marketplace for the soil. Mm-hmm. And it was a great message to the farmers who were still suffering with bad dirt in the Midwest, is like, you don't need to do crop rotation, you don't need to compost, you don't need to go back to thousands of years of farming tradition, just spray this chemical on there.
Yeah, forget about whatever you might have learned during the Dust Bowl.
Yeah. Now, that was 40 years ago. That's all ancient times. We're modern now.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so these farmers started using it, and it became a revolution for them, and it was actually called the Green Revolution of the 1960s. And so the Green Revolution was actually use of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or NPK fertilizers. And the NPK fertilizer did turn plants green because nitrogen and phosphorus do that. But what was lacking in those plants for the first time in history was the nutrients and the medicine that should always have been in that food. And so the plants became weak. Just like a human being who lacks nutrients, their immune system goes down. And when a plant's immune system goes down, it becomes prone to viruses, pests, and it can't excrete the stuff from the root system that would keep weeds at bay. And so now the plants are getting attacked from the outside, if you will, and the chemical industry says, no problem, here's a new chemical weed killer, here's a pesticide. And so the farmers got themselves locked into this codependent relationship with chemical fertilizers, then chemical drugs for the plants to keep them alive despite a failing biology underneath the surface there. Right. The most famous of these, of course, has become Roundup, the most single successful chemical warfare that's ever been sold on the planet. We currently sell and use 4.5 billion pounds of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the chemical, to treat the soils of the earth. 4.5 billion pounds of a single chemical annually. That chemical was never patented as a weed killer. It's only been patented as an antibiotic, and then it was repatented as an anti-parasite, antifungal.
Yeah, that was the original purpose of it, correct?
Well, it's the mechanism. It's the mechanism they recognized. And so the mechanism of glyphosate is to go in and block enzymes in soil bacteria, fungi, and plants. The current statistics is that less than 0.1% of the Roundup used on the planet actually hits a weed. The other 99.99% gets into the soil and in the water system and washes off. And so we are now seeing the runoff from these farms and in the water table itself. So we have fossil aquifers in the United States here that run from Canada all the way down to, historically, Mexico, that is now dried up. We've turned over 1,000 square miles of Texas into desert over just the last 20 years from sucking water out of the ground. Mm-hmm. That fossil aquifer is now contaminated with Roundup that's filtered down into this ancient freshwater source for us. And then in the same moment, you've got the Mississippi River, which collects over 80% of all the Roundup in the country. And then it's evaporating the whole time, so it's going into the air that you breathe, and then it goes into the clouds, and then it rains down on us. Recent studies in the air and rainfall in the southern United States is showing 75% of the rain, 75% of the air contaminated with Roundup. So before you even take a bite of
That's
food,
insane.
you're being hit with an antibiotic when you breathe. You're getting hit with an antibiotic when you experience rainfall. And so you may be growing organic crops, but they're getting rained on. And so we have now locked this water-soluble toxin into our environment. But then to further emphasize that, the fastest acceleration in that growth pattern of this epidemic has happened between 2012 and today, where we're seeing a doubling time every 2 to 3 years in that autism rate. At the current rate, we'll see 1 in 3 children with autism in 2035. And then in 1996, we saw this sudden rise in the Alzheimer's dementia in women. Interestingly, the Alzheimer's rates has not changed in males since that time. But at the same time, 1996, we see this uptick and consistent linear growth parallel to that Alzheimer's track in women with Parkinson's in males. And so we have, species-specific, gender-specific, organ-specific diseases in the brain and peripheral cancers, all of which took off at the same time in the mid-1990s. Autoimmune disease, unbelievable epidemic starting in the late 1990s. And so this was like the cracks that were starting to form in my worldview, that maybe there weren't 1,000 different diseases because they all started going epidemic at once, which really begged the question, is there a root cause of the root cause of the root cause of all disease?
Fake food that you consume in the average day is sickening. Your olive oil is actually peanut oil, soybean oil, and palm oil. Your cheese and even bread contains wood pulp. Yes, wood pulp, which the FDA says is safe to eat. Thanks for the advice, but last time I checked, I wasn't a beaver. Your dried spices and herbs contain a large amount of garden weeds. Your tea contains sawdust and sand. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Blueberries are also often faked. Most products containing blueberries, such as muffins, cereals, and pancakes, contain precisely 0 blueberries. Real blueberries are expensive, and so food scientists have perfected a recipe of sugar, purple dye, and other questionable ingredients to craft imitation blueberries that have no health benefits whatsoever. Quality and health-related food issues, the USA ranked 120th out of 125 countries, putting it in the same league as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Ethiopia, and Chad. It's one of life's great ironies that the world's wealthiest superpower has some of the lowest quality food in the world. But it's not the fault of the American people. Large American food companies that have monopolized the market use every trick in the book and some horrifying techniques and chemicals to make terribly poor quality food seem more appealing to shoppers. And in America and some other countries, the regulations just aren't in place to properly regulate what goes into people's food. At least they're nowhere near stringent enough. But just remember, every time you shop, you are voting. Avoiding cheap, processed, and general dodgy-looking food will reduce the demand for it. Choosing to instead shop at local stores with real, high-quality food will make a difference, and you'll live a longer and happier life for it as well, just for the sake of a bit less convenience.
Shadows on the wall.